Hello and welcome to Man, Woman, God. I'm Nikki Cauchi, your host. Today I'll be speaking with Janet Himstedt, who is a mum that homeschools her 3 children. Janet, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nikki. It's great to be here.
I'm glad you could find time to come and talk to us. Now, Janet, I want to first find out, before we talk about homeschooling, how and when did you give your life over to God?
Well, I was blessed to be raised in a Christian home, so I always knew that Jesus loved me. My mum always told me. There wasn't a time when I didn't know that. But for me, it was not about the knowledge of Jesus loving me. It was about a realisation of what his love really was. And it wasn't until my 20s when I did some dumb things and walked away from religion, walked away from everything my mum and dad had raised me to do and be, that I started to live a life. I was living with a non-Christian, not going to church. And I had a lot of shame and guilt in my life, and I couldn't understand how Jesus could love me. And it was in that time of searching for happiness and searching about what I knew about Jesus. And it was during a Easter time. I had to think about what he did, and I just remember thinking about the fact that he went to the cross, and those sins he took to the cross were my sins. And I was sobbing and really upset about that. But the amazing thing was that I also felt an overwhelming grace that he had for me, that yes, he took those sins to the cross and they were my sins and I was living in shame and guilt, but he did that because he loved me. And it was in my when I was unlovable that he did that, and he did it when I didn't deserve it. And it was that grace, and I understood, oh, that's what it's all about. It's being saved by grace.
Well, that's beautiful. Now, you were a career woman before you got married. Tell me, how and when did you meet your husband?
Well, I had ran away from my family and God, and I ended up in Perth. I was working in Perth. And this time when I was thinking, I need to go back to Brisbane, I need to get right again with God, and I felt God say, go to this church. So I went to this church expecting great things, and I sat in the service for like 3 hours, and I'm waiting for God to say something, and nothing happened. I walked out of there quite down, thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. And I was in the car park, and I recognised a man that I knew. And I just said a quick hello, and he said, oh, what are you doing here? I said, I'm working over here. I asked him what he was doing here. I knew him from Rockhampton. He said he was one of the speakers. And all of a sudden he looked at me, and I felt like he was looking through my eyes into my soul. And he said, you'll meet your husband in Brisbane. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. I'd never had anyone prophesy over me before. And I really didn't think, I just thought it was, kooks that said those things, and totally disregarded it. Went on home, I'm away home, I'm thinking, did he know? Did I tell him I was going back to Brisbane? No, I didn't. So anyway, I went back to Brisbane, didn't think anything of it. Went to a church my sister had told me about. I walked in and I met Darren, my husband, and he invited me to come to a youth group outing, and we started dating. About a month after we started dating, I saw this pastor in this church. And I thought, oh, I'll go say hello to him. And I found out that he worked there and had been travelling. And he asked me how I was going. I said, great. And he did it again. He looked at me, and it was like he was giving me this message from God, but I didn't get this. He said, you've met your husband. And I went, oh, really? Oh, okay, Darren's my husband. There you go. And just disregarded it again. And we then went overseas. We'd broken up a few times. One of the times when we'd broken up, I went down to see him and talk to him, and said to him, he asked me how I was going. I said, well, Darren and I broke up, and it was with an attitude of, you have no idea what you were talking about. And he just looked at me and says, what I want you to do on the way home, I want you to pray that the Holy Spirit claim Darren as your husband. And I thought about it, I thought, okay, well, I've got nothing to lose. Again, disregarding the word of God. And I went in my car, prayed this prayer, walked in the door of my home, and I hadn't heard from Darren for a long time, and he was on the phone. My mum says, Darren's on the phone waiting to talk to you. And he said they felt God say to him, let's give it another go. Yeah.
Gorgeous. Now, you and your husband, Darren, were missionaries in Thailand for 10 years. What was that journey all about?
So when I met him, he was already on the journey of missions, and I was nowhere even interested in missions. But he invited me to come to on a mission trip. It was a short-term team to Thailand he was leading. And in my career of tourism, I had clocked up a lot of countries, and I was up to 35, 36 countries, and the place he was going was Thailand. And I thought, yeah, great, another stamp in the passport, 37 countries, awesome, I'll come. So as you can tell, we're like on two different paths. He was going there to encourage the missionaries. I was going there to see what Thailand can give me, what it has that I can benefit from. And so we went on this trip, and it was disastrous for us too. We broke up, and it was clear that we were on two different paths. We came home, and he went on a path of feeling like he had to go back full time, and I wasn't interested. And I remember I was in my lounge room, sitting down, unpacking all my things I'd brought back from Thailand. And I was unpacking things I'd brought back from the night markets, the villages. And as I was unpacking them and looking around my lounge room, I just went, oh, look, there's stuff from all over the world here, from Greece and from Europe. And it just hit me. It was like a blast of the Holy Spirit. Just went, you went on that trip with the thought of what could I get from them, and not going there to see what you could give to them. And it was just a realization of how wrong I had my thoughts of when I travelled. And I continued to travel, but I had it with a God's heart. I went to these places. I went to the Maldives next, and I remember thinking, I want to go there and take God's love. And I remember we went around the back of the resort, and I started praying for these people. And so it wasn't the actual travelling that was wrong, it was just my heart had been so wrong. And so I was on a journey of, what does that mean? And I just knew I was changed for life, that when I travelled it was going to be different. And I did a missions course, and my husband currently teaches this Kairos missions course. And he, on that, it talked about how will they know unless you go? So it's really black and white for me. I'm like, well, why am I not going? And so I started this journey then. I decided that, I was going to do missions. And during that time, we were both on that path again, and we were just friends.
Okay, Janet, we're just going to have to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about how you chose to become a homeschooler on the mission field. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back. I'm speaking with Janet Himstedt. Janet, now we were talking about your journey into homeschooling. So you went to the mission field, you had 3 girls there, and tell me about homeschooling. Why did you choose to do it in Thailand, of all places?
Yeah, well, we didn't originally choose it. We put our eldest in Thai kindy, and that was great, but the homework was quite ridiculous. And we decided we wanted to educate her mostly in English, because she was speaking 100% Thai. So then we put her in an American school, but the calendar year never worked with our furloughs. And so I felt God really I had no choice. I was pushed into the homeschooling thing, and we decided to homeschool while we were at home in Australia. But we also thought, well, maybe we could continue this because it's going so well. We could get some Australian curriculum. And so I struggled with it a lot, for reasons that most people struggle with the thought of homeschooling. And I thought, well, you know what? If my husband, who has multiple degrees, is okay for me to educate his children, I'll do it. And I didn't realise that he was all for it before I even was.
So what reactions have you had towards you to being a homeschooling mother?
I've had both good and bad. Different reactions, a bit of coolness from people because they don't really know how to respond and what it means, and they've got preconceived ideas of what homeschoolers are. One particular lady cornered my children and said, now, is your mum really a qualified teacher to teach you? And they answered brilliantly, but I just thought about it and I thought, well, I'm not, but being qualified doesn't actually always make you a good teacher. It's good that you've got the qualifications, but I can also teach my children. I have the love to teach them how to learn and give them the love of learning. And so I thought, and then I had some other people who gave me great comments. They would say to me, how great my kids were, and then I would ask me which school they went to, and I'd tell them my home school, and they were quite shocked, but it was good. It was a good thing that they'd actually said to me first, how great the kids were.
Now, Janet, the question that I have to ask you, and I'm sure many people have asked you, and many people out there watching you speaking is going to ask you this question: how do your kids socialise? Because they don't have playtime, they don't have lunchtime, and they're together by themselves. They don't have any outside, or do they? Outside friendships?
Well, that is the one thing that most people wonder. I've been asked that a lot of times. And for me, there's two different ways you can socialise kids. There's a primary socialisation, which I want to come from the home, and then the secondary socialisation, which could come from school and the play yard and from TV even. But for me, I want their primary socialisation to be home. And then the secondary socialisation is they go to a homeschool co-op on a Mondays with 70 kids, a sports group on a Friday with 200. They go to netball, they go to all those, you know, dance and piano, and so they have lots of time, and actually they have more time to play than most kids, so it's not an issue at all.
Okay, and how long do you think you'll be homeschooling them for, Janet?
Well, I actually inquire of God every year. It could be another year, it could be right through. I have no idea. It has to be something that God has clearly said for Darren and I to continue, and so I'm not sure at this point.
Is there a syllabus that you have to follow, and how do you know which one's right for your child?
Well, I guess the good thing is you get to know each child and you get to know their learning styles, and then you look for curriculum. There's so much curriculum out there, it's actually ridiculous. There is so many different styles, so many different ones that can fit different children, and because you know your child so well, you can just choose whatever one that you think will work with your child. And there's also online schools, there's so much you could do. There's no one size fits all.
So if you wanted to take your children right up into VCE and to try and get into university, how does that all work out?
Well, the one thing I do say is that you don't have to be the specialist of every subject. You can find so much support. There is so many amazing networks out there. There are people who can come, and we have a homeschool co-op where we employ an English teacher. She's a specialist in that area, and if that's something we need, we can find someone. And there's even, as I said, online, there's lots of help you can get from there, but mainly the support network is the key to that sort of thing. And you can go right through to grade 12 and different options that you can follow there.
Okay, now Janet, you've obviously been doing this for a little while, so what advice would you give to other homeschooling mums or people that are considering homeschooling?
Yeah, the advice I would give is the advice people gave me, and there's a few things. It is a spiritual journey for the mum, the teacher, the mum or the dad, and you've got to just see it as a journey with your child, and you will learn really quickly how to practice the fruits of the Spirit and to ask God for wisdom, His wisdom, not worldly wisdom. You'll be constantly seeking that wisdom from God, and that's a good thing because you grow with your children and you're constantly apologising if you're not doing the right thing, and you have a great relationship. The thing I love the most is you get to know your kids really well. And I'd also say that you look for support networks. That's the thing you need to find. There is so much support out there for homeschoolers now.
Well, it's sort of pretty obvious to me that, you know, you really also need support from your husband. So you obviously get that.
Yes.
And that's an important part of
yes, it is.
Journeying along
Definitely. Yes.
the road. Now, where would you see homeschooling going? What's the journey for homeschooling? Because, I mean, it's very big in the United States, but, you know, is it growing here in Australia?
Yeah, definitely. I just think it's just going to get bigger and better here. People are going to see, actually, that's a fun way of doing it. It works. It's not so hard, and that's what I'm really excited about, because you know, with the way the world changes so quickly, and we can change with that, and we can do some things that are just fun and spend time with our kids.
Finally, I have to ask, do your children enjoy being homeschooled? Or do they sometimes ask, Mum, I'd love to go to school?
Yeah, well, I do get scared when people ask them directly, do you like being homeschooled? And a lot of people have asked them that, but they've always had such a positive reply. They love it. They get to do more playtime, get to do more things that they love to learn. And I had my eldest, who has been in public school, and she had asked me about whether or not she could look at going to public school. So we did a pros and cons, and we went through all of the things that she would be doing in school and the differences with homeschooling. And we just prayed about it, and she saw, you know what, she loves homeschooling. And so we talk about with the kids, and we're open. You know, some people, I believe, it's a good thing for their kids to go to school, but for us, God has clearly shown us that they love it and it works for us, and we get to go on holidays and times, you know, that are outside of the school holidays, so we have amazing fun as a family.
Janet, thank you so much for coming and sharing. That's really great, and good luck on your journey.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We'll be back in a few minutes with our resident health professional, Dr Rowen D'Souza. Welcome back to Man, Woman, God. Our resident health professional, Dr Rowen D'Souza, is here to talk about Daniel's diet. Welcome, Rowen.
Thanks, Nikki. So today what we're going to talk about is Daniel's Diet. It's a book by Philip Bridgman. He's a naturopath, and it's based upon a 10-day vegan detox that people go through to help lose weight and to also detoxify as well. It's based upon the principles found in the Bible in Daniel chapter 1, where Daniel takes a challenge of having a completely natural diet for 10 days and as a way of detoxifying and also, in fact, getting closer to God. What I've found useful about this program is that it is a good way to introduce people to safe and effective detoxification, because what it does is it breaks the addiction of sugar, or starts to. During the diet, people are encouraged to eat just natural foods that in fact would have been available in biblical times, foods that are completely natural and are unprocessed. And what the diet does is it breaks the cycle of sugar addiction. What happens during the day is that when we eat, if the foods we eat are laden with sugar, the body produces a hormone called insulin to deal with the increased sugar load. And sugar is converted then to fat and stored in fat cells. In our modern diets, with the massive amount of sugar that we consume every day, the body produces more and more insulin, and what happens is we have these spikes of high sugar and low sugar during the day. And a lot of people report that they have periods of energy, and then they have low periods. During the low periods, they turn to more sugar to try and lift their spirits. During the periods of high sugar, what they find is that they actually can be quite manic. So what Daniel's Detox is trying to do is to balance the sugar highs and lows during the day, and find some balance so that we can start to detoxify and lose weight naturally. Losing weight is an interesting thing. You know, in the last 30 years, everyone has been talking about fat as causing weight gain. And in fact, if you look at our diets, we have changed the way we view fats. Fats are a natural part of our diet. In fact, there are some fats that are essential to our diets, and they're found in vegetables, they're found in meat products, they're found in various things. And fats are very, very good. Our brain is essentially a big lump of fat. Our nerves are surrounded by fat. So we need fat. We just don't need the wrong types of fat. Sugar too is an important part of our diet, though if you think about where we get our sugar from now, we get our sugar from processed sources. So what Daniel's diet is looking at is balancing the sources of sugar, balancing the sources of fat, and allowing the body to achieve more balance, or what we call homeostasis. So when people go through the Daniel's Diet, what I have found is some very, very interesting things. The reason I put people on the Daniel's Detox is, one, because it is actually quite a simple thing to do. After all, you're eating real food. It doesn't require any supplements. It doesn't require anything artificial. It just requires you to eat food. And in fact, what it encourages you to do is eat regular, smaller meals as well. The interesting thing of why I put people through the Daniel's Detox is because a lot of people present to me with a lot of inflammation, a lot of gut toxicity, and of course weight gain that they can't control, or weight that they can't seem to shift. A lot of people will report that they will lose some kilos but will always get stuck at a certain point. And so clearly the body can't get beyond that certain point in its weight loss journey. What we find with the Daniel's Detox is it's a good way to get people started in that process. It's eating real food, and it's eating real food at regular intervals. What I've found, though, with this is that, very interestingly, 20% of the people, and I've probably done 100 of these detoxes with patients at least, 20% of the people who I put on the detoxes are unable to complete it. What we find is that when they start to have these sugar cravings, when they start to have the withdrawal symptoms, it gets too much for them. Now that is an interesting phenomenon, it's something I see in 20% of people, but it just shows us how addicted we are to sugar and just how full our diets are of this substance. So what happens with the Daniel's Detox for the 80% of those who can, is that they find that they lose weight. They find, interestingly enough, that they lose a lot of inflammation through the body as well. And this is covered in the book. The book goes through various rationales behind it. It talks about the biblical references from Daniel chapter 1. And it talks about how we deal with food and how we process food, and how also our body stores weight. What happens is, our bodies, Daniel lived in a different time. Daniel lived in a Stone Age time. People had basic access to nutrition. If you couldn't grow it yourself, or if you couldn't hunt it, you couldn't eat it. So basically there was no processed food, and certainly there was no processed sugar. The only sugar that we had was found seasonally and was found in for short periods of time. So in those times we would feast on those substances. We certainly wouldn't have them all year round. So what Daniel's detox does is takes those artificial sources, takes those rich sources of food from our diet, and strips our diet back to probably a much more natural diet, a diet that we would find if we didn't have processed food, if we didn't have rich sources of sugar. And what it does is it gives the body time to rest. Sugar is a very important thing, and in fact our next review we're going to be talking about a book called Sweet Poison, which also goes very well with Daniel's Detox. If you have any questions about Daniel's Detox, please email us at manwomangod.org, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. See you next time.
Well, that's all we have for today on Man, Woman, God. Thank you so much for joining us, and God bless you. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.